The cowboy never imagined that a single piece of paper nailed to a saloon wall would rewrite his entire life. But loneliness has a way of making men careless with fate. He had written the notice with practical hands and a practical heart. Maid wanted. Cooking, cleaning, honest work. Pay fair, nothing more. No poetry, no hope, no promise of anything beyond. Survival on a stretch of land where the wind spoke more often than people did. His ranch sat far from town, surrounded by endless plains that looked beautiful from a distance and merciless up close. And after burying his last hired hand months ago, he had grown tired of talking to ghosts. Every morning began the same way: cold coffee, dust in his throat, silence so loud it felt like judgment. He wasn't looking for companionship, and he certainly wasn't looking for trouble. Trouble, however, had a way of finding men who believed they were finished with life's surprises. It arrived late one afternoon, riding alone through the heat shimmer, a figure so still and composed that at first he thought the land itself had learned how to walk. She dismounted without hesitation, her movements controlled, deliberate, as though fear had never been part of her education. She was Apache. That much was clear to him instantly, not because of the buckskin dress or the beadwork stitched with careful meaning, but because of the way she carried herself, upright, alert, unbroken. Her hair was braided neatly, a single feather rising behind her head like a quiet declaration, and her eyes, dark and steady, met his without apology. The cowboy stepped onto the porch, one hand resting near his belt out of old habit rather than threat, and before he could ask her name or her business, she spoke with a voice that did not tremble. "I saw your notice," she said. He nodded, already preparing to explain the work, the rules, the distance, the fact that this was no place for softness. Then she said the words that split the air open like a rifle crack. "I did not come to be your maid. I came to be your wife." For a moment the world forgot how to move. The cowboy laughed, a reflex born of disbelief, but the sound died quickly when she did not join him. There was no humor in her face, only certainty, the kind that unsettles men more than anger ever could. He told her she was mistaken, that she should leave before sunset, that this was not a joke he appreciated. She listened, then told him calmly that her people were being hunted, pushed, erased by laws written by men who had never learned how to listen, and that survival sometimes required choosing a future no one else would offer. Marriage to him, she said, would make her untouchable to some and dangerous to others. She did not ask for love. She did not beg for protection. She offered partnership, strength, and truth. The cowboy had lived his entire life, believing the world was divided into simple lines, right and wrong, work and rest, man and woman, white and native. But as the sun sank behind the plains, those lines blurred until he could no longer tell which ones had ever been real. He told her he didn't even know her name. She gave it. He told her he didn't trust strangers. She reminded him that history was built by strangers who refused to stay invisible. He told her people would talk. She answered that people always did, especially when they were afraid. When night came, she remained, sitting near the fire as though she had earned the right, and the house that had once felt hollow now felt charged with something dangerous and alive. Outside, coyotes howled, and for the first time in years, the cowboy did not feel alone, but he did feel watched by the future. And as you listen to this story unfold, remember this moment, because everything begins here. If stories of fate, courage, and forbidden choices stir something in you, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, because the journey has only just begun, and what comes next will change everything. By morning, the ranch no longer felt like neutral ground. It felt like a line drawn in dust, that both the past and the future were daring each other to cross, and the cowboy woke with the uneasy sense that sleep had not rested him but warned him. The Apache woman was already awake, moving quietly through the small cabin as if she had memorized its shape overnight, sweeping the floor with practiced efficiency, setting water to boil, not as a servant but as someone claiming space through action rather than words. He watched her from the doorway, conflicted by how natural her presence already felt and how dangerous that feeling was. In town, men noticed immediately that something had changed. Stares lingered too long. Conversations stopped when he passed. And by midday the whispers had sharpened into open suspicion. They said he had brought trouble onto himself, that some boundaries were written into the land itself, and crossing them never ended cleanly. He said nothing, because silence had always been his armor, but it cracked when a man spat near his boots and called her a savage. That night, as the wind pressed against the walls and the fire burned low, she told him pieces of her story, not softened, not dramatized, but stripped down to truth. She spoke of villages broken, promises erased, women treated as spoils or burdens, and of her refusal to vanish quietly the way history seemed to demand. She told him marriage was not romance to her. It was survival with dignity. He told her he had buried his wife years ago, that grief had hollowed him out until all that remained was routine and endurance. She listened, really listened, and said grief was not a reason to stop living. When riders appeared on the horizon days later, silhouettes against a hard blue sky, the choice he had been avoiding arrived fully formed. The men came with questions disguised as concern, with warnings wrapped in threats, and when the cowboy stood beside her instead of stepping away, something irreversible happened. The ranch was no longer just his. It became a stand. That night, as torches flickered in the distance and the land held its breath, he realized the woman who had arrived asking to be his wife had already changed him more than years of solitude ever could. And as this tension builds and the world around them begins to push back, remember to subscribe to the channel, because the story is only tightening its grip, and what comes next will test love, loyalty, and survival itself. The violence did not arrive suddenly because violence rarely does. It crept in disguised as inevitability, carried on rumors sharpened by fear, and given permission by men who believed the land belonged only to those who had learned to take it first. The cowboy sensed it in the way the air felt heavier, in the way horses spooked at shadows, in the way the Apache woman sharpened her knife each evening without being asked. She did not prepare out of panic but out of knowledge passed down through generations that understood what happened when patience was mistaken for weakness. When the riders came this time, they did not pretend to be neighbors. They came at dusk, armed and certain, faces hardened by a righteousness that excused cruelty. Words were exchanged, then lost, and the first shot split the quiet like a verdict. The cowboy fought not as a hero from stories, but as a man defending the one place left where his soul still lived. The Apache woman stood beside him, fearless, precise, her movements efficient and deadly. Not because she loved violence, but because she refused to die quietly. Smoke, dust, and fear tangled together until the night itself seemed to recoil. When it ended, bodies lay still and the land remembered. In the aftermath, the cowboy understood that there was no going back to isolation, no retreat into neutrality. He had chosen a side by choosing her. As dawn broke, painting the sky in colors too gentle for what had occurred, she touched his arm and said survival was not enough. They would have to live boldly now, openly, together. And as you feel the weight of this chapter, remember to subscribe, because the final chapter will not just conclude a story, it will redefine it. The days that followed the violence did not bring peace so much as clarity, the kind that settles in after a storm when the land looks the same, but nothing feels unchanged. And the cowboy understood that the world would not forgive him for the stand he had taken, nor would he ask it to. Word spread faster than wildfire, reshaping his name from a quiet rancher into a man who had crossed an unspoken line and refused to step back. Some stayed away, driven by fear or prejudice, while others came quietly, offering supplies, silence, or respect, recognizing in his choice a courage they had never found in themselves. The Apache woman remained at his side, not as a symbol or a shield, but as an equal, shaping a life with deliberate care, teaching him to see the land not as property, but as relationship, not as something to conquer, but something to belong to. Their marriage was not celebrated with music or crowds. It was sealed with shared labor, shared danger, and shared resolve, a bond forged in the understanding that love did not always arrive gently, but it endured fiercely. Seasons turned, the ranch grew steadier, laughter returned in small, unexpected moments, and the house that once echoed with emptiness now held stories worth defending. Children would one day hear of a cowboy who asked for a maid and found a partner who changed his fate, and of an Apache woman who refused to be erased and instead chose to stand where history said she should not. And as the sun set over the plains, painting the sky with quiet promise, the cowboy knew that everything had changed, not because of violence or defiance, but because two people chose each other when the world demanded they do otherwise. If this story moved you, challenged you, or reminded you that the most powerful revolutions begin with a single brave choice. Subscribe to the channel now, because stories like this keep truth alive, and there are many more waiting to be told.